everybody, Ty here. Hope everybody is doing well. So, we've been talking about it, and it's also been about a month, so we're right on schedule for this seasonal outlook here. Obviously, as we all know, the next season on the lineup here is spring, and we did an outlook in January, but we're going to kind of revise what we went over there and compare it to the new outlook. So if you look towards the bottom left corner of the screen here, you can see a clip from the January outlook. And there have been a few changes. For the most part, what we're dealing with now on this screen here is pretty similar to what we had before, minus a couple details where, for example, out towards the northwest, where we were already expecting below average temperature probabilities being higher over there, we've seen this extend a little bit off to the south and east a bit here. We were kind of reserved a little bit more towards maybe Idaho and maybe western parts of Montana. Now we're even stretching into parts of the Dakotas here at this point. And then on the warm side, we've seen a little bit of an extension of this 50 to 60 percentile area of above average temperatures. We now have southern Georgia in the mix, Florida as well, and even a small portion of extreme southern South Carolina here. Outside of that, this time frame here looks relatively identical to what we had in the last outlook here. Alaska also has seen a few changes here with this last outlook as well. We've seen a little bit of a northward extension of the below average temperature probabilities and a slight southern extension of the above average temperature probabilities. So Alaska could be pretty active as we go through this 3 month stretch here, which I find somewhat intriguing. But as we go further along here into the precip outlook for this stretch, I've also seen a few changes there. Southern Georgia and Florida here, we're starting to see that below average precip probability stretch a little further towards the north. Just about the entire state of Florida was already in the below average precip probability, but Georgia was not in it just yet. Over towards the Ohio Valley, it feels like there has been a slight extension, and I mean when I say slight, like ever so slight extension of this above average precip pushing towards the Mississippi River Basin and into the valley here. So we'll have to see what comes of that, but this could be a point of contention, especially in regards to severe weather. So definitely something I'm going to be paying attention to. It is that time of year, of course, where Dixie Alley gets a bit more active. So definitely going to be paying attention, seeing it with this signal in mind too. Also, another area that is relevant to severe weather, despite what you might think, is this area where we have the below average precip over here towards the southwest. This has got a lot to do with the EML. The elevated mix layer has a lot to do with severe weather development, especially in severe weather outbreaks that may have supercell thunderstorms. That EML is a very key factor in all of this. And usually the EML actually originates from over here and then transitions off to the east with certain storm systems. So this is basic. So you can basically consider this our EML source, with it being dry here, and you want dry mid-levels in the atmosphere for severe weather. Seems like it, unfortunately, will be bountiful over here. There will be plenty to work with. So it really still depends on other factors such as just an active storm pattern in general, troughing, other environmental factors, of course. But if we look at things from the long range here, what we can see with this may spice things up, if you will. Another area, of course, that we'll be talking about, of course, is over towards the northwest, where it's expected to be a bit more active as well. We have that above average area precip here, and this area has seen a little bit of change as well. We were kind of reserved a little bit more over towards Washington and Oregon, but now we're starting to stretch into parts of Idaho and, of course, western Montana. It'll be the last time we'll get to see this map in full here. By the time we get into late March before the official start of spring, which is March 22nd, we'll have only the map for April, May, and June left to go over. But at the very least, though, we'll be able to do a monthly outlook at that point to kind of suffice for that. And that'll be our final spring outlook. Speaking of April, May, and June, let's go ahead and take a look at that. And originally I was going to actually put the clip from last month's outlook into there, but truthfully, not much has changed. It looks pretty much identical across the board on both the temperature and the precip map here. No areas for below average temperatures in this time frame. Everybody at this point is either above average or has equal chances here. Not much has really changed with this map either in regards to the shape of these areas. We notice this it almost looks like a positively tilted, or actually, excuse me, a negatively tilted trough in a way over here towards the deep south here. Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to get negatively tilted troughs over the course of 90 days. Don't get that idea. You're getting ahead of me here. But fact in the matter is, though, this area over here in particular, over towards the Ohio Valley, towards the deep south, kind of intrigues me with the thought of maybe a few cooler days being snuck in there. And perhaps models are not picking up on it just yet. Obviously, at this range, it would be pretty much impossible, but this look is intriguing to say the least here. Now, in regards to Alaska, looks relatively the same as to what we had seen before. There is, I'm trying to remember if I saw this or not, where we had that 50 to 60% area over here on the screen. In fact, I do think we did have it. I'm not entirely sure. I'm probably going to put it back up on the screen just because. But Northern Alaska in particular looks like it's going to be very active across the board throughout spring. Above average temperatures and also a little bit wetter than average. And you can see that also on the precipitation outlook here. The Ohio Valley this season also as well is going to be very active. Out towards the west, we're unfortunately looking very dry, but honestly, during this time of year, unfortunately, that's to be expected. A lot of these areas end up being very dry during this time of year. We really don't want to see this part of Southern California end up dry, so it's very nice to see that equal chance of precip there, but in other areas, unfortunately, we can't say the same. All we can do is hope that people practice their fire safety there. But this is that area I also made mention of over towards northern parts of Alaska, where we have those above average chances of precipitation there. So like I said, very active times ahead for that northern half of the state. So a couple of things to make note of here. We've been talking about it for a while. It's really no secret. We're currently in a weak La Nina, and a La Nina that is also diminishing. So we're going to be shifting into a new phase called Enso neutral. So brief rundown as to what I'm talking about here, because I know that not everybody is aware of what El Nino and La Nina are, so I'm going to clarify it really quickly. So La Nina usually is related to cooler than average temperatures out towards the Pacific in a particular area that it's called the Nino 3.4. La Nina phase starts at negative 0.5 degrees. Now we have another phase that's opposite to that, which is El Nino. A lot of people are more familiar with El Nino versus La Nina. El Nino is when we have a phase where this area has the waters that are, I can speak right now, waters that are 0.5 degrees or more above average towards the region here. So if we end up above 0.5, we have an El Nino phase. Below negative 0.5, La Nina phase. And right in the middle sits our Enso. So from negative 0.5 to positive 0.5, anywhere in between that is considered a neutral Enso phase. And what you're looking at on this graph here is all of the model data that's available to us. So you're not going to be looking at one particular model, because I know some of these are going all the way up to El Nino. A few of these drop to La Nina. We're looking for a consensus here. And the greatest concentration of these towards March, April, and May, which is M, A, and M here, you can see that most of them have us in a neutral phase starting at the beginning of the upcoming month. So that being said, there's a heightened probability that we're going to be in a neutral Enso very, very soon. And that's going to last for a good while here, maybe even all the way up to late summer into early fall at this point. Another way to kind of reinforce the probabilities here is by looking at the official CPC product here. And what you'll notice is there is about a 65 closing in on 70% chance that we're going to be ending up in a neutral phase just within this 3 month period. And the probabilities only heighten as we go into that next 3 month period. So by the time we get into April, May, and June, there is a very high likelihood that we're going to end up in a neutral enso phase. And this is going to be the dominant phase, again, as I mentioned before, up until mid to late summer, where La Nina probabilities start to go back up. Very low likelihood as of right now that we're going to be ending up in a El Nino phase. So we're going to be a little bit closer to average in some aspects as to the weather that we would end up seeing during the spring and summer months here. So some good news with that as well. It also has a lot to do with the hurricane season. We don't really have a whole lot to worry about. We could still have an active season. Other factors, of course, run into it, but on record, usually the most active years are La Nina years. So the fact that we're kind of sneaking into that neutral enso phase might result in a slower season, but we'll have to wait and see how things go. Excuse me, I'm a little stiff right now. But one other thing we're going to look at here is we're going to be looking at our oscillations here. Now, we're looking at these oscillation phases over the course of 30 days, not necessarily every day or every week. So this is kind of a shot in the dark here. We're just kind of going off the averages to get an idea as to what the so-called dominant pattern could be in this case. Now, a thing to make note of for the month of March is we do have a neutral phase in AO region. It's this area right over here towards Greenland. This is the North Atlantic oscillation here. And then also we have a slightly positive Arctic oscillation, this area right here in the red. So we're going to see a little bit of cold air go into the northwest, and then we're going to have potential for a couple of cold snaps over here towards the eastern half of the US here. As we get into the following month here, we end up in a neutral to maybe slightly negative NAO phase with a more positive NAO phase. I meant to say AO for this region. Easy to get the two mixed up, but as you can see here, predominantly over the US there is a warm air mass that's sitting particularly over towards the southwest and southern plains states, and that's going to be look like it's going to be pretty dominant as we get into March and also as we get into April, and then May here. Getting a little bit ahead of myself, but as we continue to go forward here, as we get into June even, we start to get into a positive phase across both fronts here. Now, keep in mind, the further out we go, the less confidence I have in this. I am almost certain that this outlook here, as we get towards the back half of the season, is going to change. Just how much is the question right now. By the time we do the outlook next month, I would expect that this would change. May could probably change as well. I think it's a little less likely, but June is kind of up in the air at this point. This is really more or less a shot in the dark. This is just kind of a first look at what we could see. Now, how this affects our temperature outlook over the course of the next several months here. Of course, as I mentioned before, with that warm air mass sitting over towards the southern plains and southwest, it's no surprise to see these heightened temperatures over here. So our temperature anomaly map is going to be a little bit wacky over here towards the region. We're going to be dealing with potentially up to 20 to maybe even 25 degrees above average based off of this look alone over the course of the next 3 months. Some days could be more anomalous than others, but for the most part, I would be prepared for a pretty warm spring and maybe even an early start to summer potentially as well. So we get towards the first month of summer here, you'll notice that those temperature anomalies drop off ever so slightly, but make no mistake, you're still above average here, and during this time of year, we know how hot it can get over here. So just make sure that you are properly prepared for it, make sure you're drinking plenty of water, and taking good care of yourself. Staying inside as needed as well, and also practicing proper fire safety. These areas, unfortunately, are very much prone to wildfires. We also have this little area that's popped up over here towards the Mississippi Delta that we're going to be watching and heading into the Mississippi Basin. As far as below average temperatures for this area, Outside of maybe a small little window that pops up over here towards the northwest, I'm not really expecting too much of the lower 48 to even have below average temperatures within those next 3 months. We'll look at this month to month actually in just a moment here too. And then the same can be said for the precipitation anomaly here, but the precip anomaly here to remind you, this is over a 3 month average. This isn't even month to month. So one thing about it is, 1 month in particular on this map could determine everything. If you have one dry month here, that could influence why you would have potentially an inch or two below average probability on here. Or if you have 1 month that's 1 inch or 2 inches above average, or 3 inches or so. One anomalous month can change everything on this particular map. Just like on a monthly map, even 1 or 2 weeks of active weather or dry weather can influence the monthly outlook as well. But as you can see on here from the 3 month perspective, some things to make note of here is towards the deep south, surprisingly drier than average here. Not sure if this will end up being the final outcome here, especially considering how the Gulf often is a big influence as to the weather ahead here. And then, of course, towards the northwest, we're not surprised to see the above average precip readings over there, and then over towards the northern plains and northern states. Ohio Valley is also going to be a point of interest as we go further along into this run here. The signal is not that strong on this one. I do think as we go further along, the Ohio Valley and the Great Lakes are going to slow down, but I think at least over the first half of the season, we're going to be dealing with a good bit of activity over there as well. Like I said, a lot of this is subject to change and very well might, especially over here towards the south here. Eventually, I do think that Florida is going to start to open up, especially as we get later into spring and early summer. During the early part of spring, it tends to be a little bit more of their dry season. So it doesn't surprise me to see these values. I don't think they will be as significant as what we're seeing here as of right now. But again, this is an outlook. This is not a forecast. We'll be making updates to this as needed as we go forward here. So looking at it from a month-to-month perspective, this is where things get a little bit interesting, and this is where some of you might get scared, but I assure you there's no reason to be scared just based off of this. If there's anything to pay closest attention to, it will be this upcoming month here, March, based off of the precip outlooks. As you can see here, over towards the northwest is very active, and over towards the Ohio Valley, sneaking into the Tennessee Valley, looks incredibly active. We could have heightened precipitation values from this, of course. And this is kind of a reflection of what we saw towards the middle to late part of this month as you're watching this right now. But as we go further along into April here, that heightened probability of below average precip, notice how it starts to diminish and kind of retreats more so into southern parts of Louisiana. The Gulf seems to be a little bit quiet at this point here, but as we continue to start to warm up, I anticipate that to change. As we get towards May, notice we're starting to level out towards these regions. Of course, the areas in particular that are the most active right now is going to be over towards the northern states. The polar jet stream has really been the point of interest. The subtropical jet hasn't really kicked in. It could even potentially be a late start to that. But like I said, really at this point, trying to figure out exactly what's going on is going to kind of be like a shot in the dark at this point. But notice as we head into June, look at how we've flipped over here. And now the deep south is starting to get increased amounts of moisture. It just takes a while for the Gulf to open up, but once it does, we're off to the races at this point, which would be a welcome sign for some of us. We'll probably have a few more chances of those afternoon showers, just the typical summer weather you would expect over towards the Gulf Coast and into the southeast here. Let's go ahead and take a look now at the temperature outlook from a month-to-month perspective here. March definitely seems like the most anomalous month towards the southwest here, where we could see temperatures that are about 25 to 30 degrees above average. Looks like we could level off just a little bit. We see some of the warmest temperatures head towards the Rockies at this point, where we could have very similar values to what we saw in March over here towards, let's say, southwestern Texas into New Mexico here. So we go further along, we start to see that density of those 20 to 30 degrees above average areas start to drop off ever so slightly. We do have a little bit of cold air that tries to sneak its way into the northwest here and there, and just kind of keep things on the milder side of things. Make no mistake, it's still going to be plenty warm around here, but perhaps not a record-breaking hot summer like what we've seen over the last couple years here and there for certain months. And then as we get into June, we see the west starting to get a little bit warmer once more, but nothing extreme as of yet. Like I said, the further out we go, the more subject things are to change. But even so, if you're out west, I would expect a pretty hot summer. This is nothing uncommon for you guys. This isn't unheard of, but it's something that you still want to pay attention to nonetheless. That's it. That's all I got for you guys on this one. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend, and I will hopefully see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.